Much, Dean. Welcome, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. This is part of an ongoing journey, I guess, for all of us as we come from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, hopefully sooner than later. And it's a pleasure for us to present some of the part of our journey at McGill University, which, as most of you know, is in Montreal, Canada. This sharing information like this is really a work in progress as we learn as we go. And the cliche being building the plane as we flying it, and that's really what we're living through. From lockdown to reopening at McGill has been a real profound learning process. And as we remember, it all started with the lockdown and nothing on campus, but then mad planning as to how to reopen when the opportunity would come up. And we're going to share some of that with you today. I'm joined here by Chris Buttle, who is the Associate Provost at McGill for Academic Planning and Programming, and Elliot Felix, who is the founder and CEO of Bright Spot Strategy. And they'll introduce themselves momentarily in more detail. But when we started on the pandemic and realized that the lockdown was producing behaviors and appetites for remote working that we had been basically putting off for years, taking in more detail or more seriously, it became clear that the return after the pandemic would not be the status quo ante. There would be changes, and that we had to start thinking about these changes right away. And so while there was an emergency operations committee working on how to operate the campus during this time, we actually put together a working group of AVP and executive director level people in the university to start thinking about McGill post-pandemic, both in terms of workspaces, academic spaces, teaching, use of campus, and so on. And we engaged Bright Spot Strategies to help us in that reflection. And Bright Spot and Elliot and colleagues led us through a process of reflection that ended up in a day-long workshop with the working group I just mentioned. And so we're going to be talking about some of that, if not much of that today. It'll start with a presentation by Elliot of the work of that workshop and the outcome of that. And then we'll move into some lessons learned that will be shared between Chris and I. So with that, I'll pass over to Chris. Just say a few words about yourself and then pass to Elliot, if you don't mind.
Thanks, Cameron, and hello to everyone. Greetings from, I will say, still snowy Montreal, although it's definitely spring is in the air. It's really nice to be here today, and as Cameron mentioned, we're looking forward to sharing some of our experiences, and different institutions are thinking about this sort of post-pandemic world in different ways, and I feel very fortunate and grateful that at our university we decided to start thinking about this very early on in last fall term to really start to set the stage, because we know that that change is difficult in universities and colleges. So the question we asked ourselves is, what kind of foundational pieces can we put together now that will actually be a roadway or a runway to certain kinds of change that could be really exciting and real paradigm shifting kinds of approaches for our institutions. So I'm excited to be here, and I'll pass it over to Elliot, and we'll move through today's session. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Cameron. And we were really excited to support McGill starting this journey. Bright Spot's a strategy consultancy on a mission to create more engaging and equitable student experience and helping colleges and universities transform their staffing, their systems, their student services in pursuit of that goal to create better experiences for people and really help them transition through this moment of change, and this was a great process for us, and we're excited to share this because we think this is something other institutions can use and can learn from. So today's session is really walking you through the process we used. As Cameron mentioned, it was about bringing together representatives in terms of teaching and learning, research, IT, facilities, finance, HR, to first understand how our teaching and learning, research, work, student life, how are these changing, what might the implications be, and then come back together in a kind of a second targeted retreat to prioritize what those impacts are. So we're going to give you the context, we're going to walk you through that project. We've got 2 moments here today where we'll have a poll and then a chance for about 10 minutes of discussion with all of you. So you can kind of apply this or think through how this might apply to your campus, your institution. Then Chris and Cameron are going to go through what they have done since acting on that kind of strategy sprint we did together, and then we'll open it up for final lessons learned and Q&A, and should be a great session. So take the next 10 minutes or so to walk you through what we did together. So hopefully you can, it can spark some thinking as you're imagining your own future. So the first thing we did is answer a question, maybe an existential question, which is why have a campus? What's its future role? How might it change? And we really focused on thinking about the campus as a place for community, for collaboration, for creation, the kinds of things that you can't do online or as well, and that really celebrate Montreal's diversity and culture. Thinking about experiential learning, thinking about attracting and energizing people, making it more inclusive and more equitable. A lot of the role campus can be a great leveler and even a boost to those with that traditionally institutions weren't necessarily set up for, the a low-income student, a first-generation student, a student of color, and that the role of technology was not to replace this space, but really to enhance the experience. Then we thought about, with that big picture established, we thought about what's the future direction in teaching and learning going to be like, and we noted that it's probably going to be more modular. It's going to be more of a kind of the curriculum and the course schedule is going to be more of a jigsaw puzzle, fitting together in-person and online activities, synchronous and asynchronous, more modular, also going to be more applied, students working on real-world problems to help them make an impact, field work, local, international, going to be more interactive. The one-way stuff can happen online or on your own time. And when you come together, it's going to be to talk about things, to make things, to interact. Of course, it's going to be a blend of in-person and online activities. And we said, some students may never come to campus, others may never use a traditional classroom. Then we thought about what's the future of student life. We know that it's going to be focused on building community, on support with sticky spaces. If people are going to come to campus, let's keep them here. Let's not have a transactional relationship with space where you drop in for a course and you leave. But that might be the case. That might be how you are balancing work and life. But in the larger scheme of things, how can we create more sticky spaces that are more digitally connected, and we're really bringing well-being into the fore? We talked about how research is changing to be more computational, more in silico research, where technology is cutting across so many different fields, that it's driven by impact, that more space and equipment will be shared. It'll be more accessible to undergrads, sort of blurring teaching and research, and it'll be supported through digital resources from the library, data, technology, and the like. And finally, we talked about the future of work, knowing that it's going to be more flexible, that there's a real chance for things to backslide and be less equitable. So that really needs intentionality and forethought, so that people are included if they're not physically in the room. It's going to need more flexible spaces, better digital tools, and new metrics. A lot of folks, what's holding them back from working successfully remotely is, they don't have a clear sense of how their work is going to be evaluated, or what they're working toward. Out of that, we generated a whole bunch of different ideas, and we prioritized them in terms of by color. We looked at the implications by space type. The yellow was classrooms, the orange was study, the research was green, residential was purple, office was blue, and general and event space is pink. And we tried to put them into these buckets relative to effort and impact, and recognize that some things are major projects, others maybe are lower priority, some could be kind of put on the back burner, and others might be more like quick wins. that we could focus on right away, like piloting new space standards, workplace standards for staff that you're going to hear more about from Cameron and Chris later. So I want to zoom in on some of those digital post-its. We did these workshops were all virtual, as you can imagine. We had lots of great sessions on Zoom, and we used a tool called Mural to create basically virtual post-its, and did a lot of real-time prioritization of things. So zooming in on a few of those, we noted that students aren't clamoring back to campus to get into a lecture hall where they just listen to a professor and don't interact. So we're going to have fewer tiered lecture halls. The lecture halls that we have are going to be really reimagined for collaboration. It could be in pods like this at Imperial College London, or it could be 2 rows per tier. So the front row can turn around and you can have kind of a breakout right in situ, or they may be more flat and flexible. More dry computational research. Dry insofar as, there aren't gases and liquids, certainly not dry in terms of subject matter. Couldn't resist telling at least one dad joke there. We know that this dry research space, it's going to be office space for computation, but it might also be fabrication space where you're creating instruments, soldering a circuit, everything in between. We know that it's going to be a hybrid workplace going forward, where a mix of some time on campus, some time at home or in other places, co-working spaces, and that mix is going to be different person to person, role to role. And so we thought co-working spaces might be a great opportunity to test the waters for some of this kind of flexible third working space that maybe offers some convenience and allows for this hybrid work. We know that while students maybe aren't clamoring to get back into the lecture hall, one of the big takeaways is they are anxious to get back to campus to work together on projects that make a difference, that build their skills, that connect them to a purpose, to their passion. And so we really need more space for projects and for study. Sometimes all that means is a table and a screen. Sometimes it means making things in a hands-on way, the kinds of things you can't make at home because you don't have a shop or you don't have your peers around you. We know that part of the sticky space means it's amenities and spaces that enhance belonging and well-being, everything from food to break bread together to amenities like that support well-being, like bike shops and really health and wellness spaces, everything in between. Speaking of in between spaces, I think one thing we've all learned from the pandemic is how much more valuable both outdoor spaces and the kind of serendipity and chance encounter that space engenders. And so really thinking about a future where we dial those up and outdoor spaces are actively programmed, like the Harvard Quad here, with seating, with events, and that we're not trying to minimize circulation, but we're as wasted or inefficient space, but actually that's some of the most valuable space you've got, because it's before and after a class, it's before and after the meeting, it's where people interact, it's where they bump into each other, and that's so much of the value of being together in the same place at the same time. And finally, that physical and digital don't have to compete; they can enhance each other. In fact, we kind of imagine a phygital world where these things come together to support the hybrid, and it may be hybrid learning, as you're seeing at Colorado or Harvard Business School, where you've got some students in the room and some who aren't, or it may be about using technology to make the experience in the space better. We were lucky enough to do a previous project with McGill's library, where we uncovered that one of the big pain points was students not knowing if they could get a seat in the library, in part because there aren't enough seats in the library and McGill's undertaking a great reimagining of their library, but also because the interface just isn't there. So one of the things we uncovered is a great app called Weights, and McGill has already implemented it, I think, which is a testament to how fast you all move, so that people can get a sense of how many seats are open using anonymized occupancy data. So that's an example of the digital can enhance the physical, because it can help you discover space, book space, navigate to it, use it, maybe even provide feedback on it. So we're now going to be moving to our first poll that's going to kick off our discussion period, where we hear from you about the kinds of challenges you're facing as you're adapting to COVID and planning for the future. It might be the kinds of things that that you've heard McGill just talk about, and we think we're very interested to hear what you think is the top challenge. Of course, it's hard to pick one, but as we think about the future and reflect on this project, we know that student service centers are often distributed across the campus. A lot of universities, there's a kind of moniker for this, the runaround or the shuffle. As students go to one office and they get sent to the other because they went to the wrong place, and that might be digitally bouncing around or physically bouncing around. We know that a lot of faculty and staff workplaces don't have the space to collaborate, especially with folks that are not in the room. It's not atypical for people to spend half their time collaborating. Also not atypical for an office to be 80% individual space and 20% at best collaboration space. So those are out of whack. Maybe it's that your classrooms have fixed seating and they're too dense, too many students packed in there. You're kind of focused more on throughput than the experience. Might be that you have the wrong technology or that it's outdated. It might be that there's institutional inertia from tradition and hard to get buy-in to change. It might be that you have rigid governance structures or policies that are kind of standing in the way of doing things differently as you try and adapt, or it may be external constraints, funding, political landscape, what have you. So let's take a look at our poll results. And interestingly, it seems like the two biggest things that really jump off the page for folks are the distributed service centers and the lack of collaboration space in the workplace. So maybe some clear mandates for things to focus on in the future as you adapt to COVID and you imagine remote work and hybrid work, and as you imagine a student experience that's I was going to say more seamless. I guess you can't be more seamless, but let's hope that it's seamless and students get the support they need when they need it and where they need it and from whom they need it. So at this point, we can use this poll. Hopefully, this planted some seeds as you're thinking about your own institution and your future. Now, what we'd love to do is hear the challenges you're facing as you adapt to COVID and plan for the future. And type your answers in the chat. Just would love to hear a quick sentence or phrase. What are you noodling on as you try and plan for the future? What's been a challenge for you?
Maybe I'll just wade in here with an interesting or a comment related to the poll results. One of the things that is interesting, of course, is the interplay between some of those challenges and the faculty and staff workplaces lacking collaborative space. In some institutions, there's an internal governance structure or policy that actually makes it really difficult to move the needle on that. So I think one of the interesting pieces is building a model by which understanding the interconnectedness among the challenges becomes really important. And I think we'll speak a little bit later around some of the challenges on the staff workspace issue. But part of it does have to do with what are the policies with respect to collective agreements with unions, for example, or just internal policies around flex time that might already exist in an institution. So I do feel the interplay between the challenges is where there's a lot of interesting work to do.
That's a great. It's hard to pick one, and it's also hard to. Some of these things can't be solved in isolation, right? You have to think about the external constraints, the internal inertia, the policies, all at the same time. And Bob has noted that financial resources for change are a challenge. We'd love to hear from other folks if you've got some things you're thinking about as you noodle on the future. And Lee is talking about redesigning the space is also a challenge. Melissa is mentioning that there's a lot of changes due to COVID, but it's a bit of a perfect storm maybe at the time when you need to make the most change, you've got the fewest resources to do so. And I think one of the things about spaces is they do take some time to change. It's a slow medium to work in, I guess. So that's always a challenge. And one thing is to be thinking about is always how you can speed that up. Are there things you can test out? Are there things you can parallel path? Are there things you can pilot? Which I think we're gonna hear about shortly from McGill. I think Chris mentions how much work from home will actually be allowed and how to strike the right balance culturally and operationally is a great point. And I think in the work we've been doing with a few different institutions at the moment, the rubber really hits the road when you decide at which point, how much time in the office is enough time to merit an assigned desk or workstation? I think that is really going to be the critical question for so many campuses, because, if someone's in the office 3 days a week, are you still going to assign them a desk? Probably yes, if it's 4. 3 is probably where it gets interesting. 2, probably still interesting. 1, probably they're sharing space, but that middle of the road, I think is going to be interesting. And then if and when you move to a shared model, how you do that, because I think a lot of people conceive of sharing space as, 2 people are assigned the office, and it's like, I'll be in there Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and you'll be in there Tuesday, Thursday, but that's actually the wrong way to do it, because you want the largest pool of shared space possible shared among more people, because then kind of the law of averages, it balances out, and people can usually find a space. Whereas if you just have 2 people sharing one space, what are the odds that they both need it on a Wednesday?
Sorry, Elliot. Yeah, no, if I may, I think that this is really the nexus of the whole thing. I see Chris made a comment about policy frameworks. Policy frameworks are only really part of it. I saw another output from one of these organizations that's doing a lot of literature on this. They say that the time in the office should all be about team connectedness, and I really think it's much more subtle than that. And this is something we're starting to explore. We'll get into this a little later in the next part of the presentation, but the policy framework is one thing that really starts to determine, how much time people should spend at home, what equipment they have to be given, what are the tax consequences of doing that, and so on and so forth. But the more difficult conversation is actually having operating units, reconsider their work processes to make the best use of time in the office. So the policy framework is one thing, but I think the work processes have to be rethought. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but it really is an intersection of the two things.
Yeah, that's a great comment, and it's definitely nuanced. It's not simple, and even when you think it's simple, you understand that it's not. We did a return to work survey across the U.S. a few months ago, and the really interesting thing is those that went back to the office already in the fall, the vast majority went back for what you might think of as functional needs. They basically didn't have a good place to work at home, couldn't concentrate, kids around, didn't have broadband, whatever it might be. So they went back for functional reasons, but then when you asked them what the benefits were, it was overwhelmingly about culture, feeling better connected to people, feeling part of something. And so even when it seems simple, I'm going back to the office because I can't concentrate at home, or I can't be connected at home. It turns out that what people value even more from that is the connection to colleagues. And it looks like Lynn has a question about retrofitting classrooms to allow for simultaneous on and off learning to occur together. And I think the simple answer is you do. I think the complex answer is that operationally, you need more than a good hybrid classroom requires more than technology. So I'm just going back to the picture at Harvard and Colorado State. And by the way, Harvard has a great article or blog post they wrote that I'll dig up while Cameron and Chris are talking about their conversion to hybrid classrooms. But I think what's really interesting is there's huge operational implications, because I think most institutions have found that to support simultaneous hybrid learning in person and remote takes at least one more person just to run the technology, because you've now like doubled or tripled the complexity, because you've got people in two locations interfacing in two different ways. And so, having displays and having distributed mics and cameras is only a small part of it. Figuring out who's going to operate those, pay attention to those, integrate those into the teaching and learning activities is a whole other kettle of fish.
And Elliot, I might add one other piece that from the instructor's perspective, many instructors, of course, believe that this is an easy solution, and it's challenging from the technological perspective, but also the pedagogical challenges when teaching in a hybrid context it can't be understated. And I really think that the training of the instructors to go alongside that is quite a significant obstacle, even if the technology is and the staff to run the technology is readily available. And that's a lot of the feedback we've heard from some of our instructors that want to go down that route. They might try it and realize this is actually quite a different way of thinking about teaching, as opposed to flipping the switch on a Zoom lecture, for example. So I guess, Elliot, I think this is my turn to take over for a little while now, correct?
Yes, sir. And I will look for the hybrid article in the meantime. And if folks have questions, you can start to put them in the questions tab. We'll start to answer those as we go, and certainly we'll have time at the end. But be thinking about your questions as we get into the next section. Take it away.
Great, thanks. So Elliot, you're going to flip the slides for me. We can go to the next one. So thanks everyone for the comments in the chat. It's interesting to see, and I think there's a lot of alignment on some of the topics. When we kind of moved from the workshop that Elliot described and working with Brightspot and thinking a little bit about institutional change with respect to the sort of post-COVID context, we tried to develop some guiding principles around this journey. It's incredibly complex, interconnected, and there are interconnected challenges, as we mentioned, whether it's resources, internal policies, work culture, etc. And interestingly, I think, and one thing that didn't come up in the polls was the slowness of the academic culture with respect to some change. And McGill is turning, just passing our second century. I think next week is our official birthday as we welcome in our third century. So we're an old institution by North American standards, and we're a very slow-moving institution. Cameron's laughing because he gets it, and many of you have equal challenges. We're a slow-moving institution, very traditional in terms of disciplines and how our academic structures are in place and embedded within the framework. So one of the things we've tried to do is always keep our academic mission at the forefront and recognize that what is our goal and how do we make changes that further speak to our academic mission. We've been trying to approach this where everyone involved are partners in change and not bystanders. One thing that doesn't go over well is making certain changes without the right kind of buy-in from the different people who are going to be impacted by this. Another principle was that anything we do actually has to reach a goal of increased efficiency or have a positive return on investment. We don't make changes that are going to cost us more money. We're all cash strapped. We know that. We need to make changes that are actually going to benefit not only our academic mission, but also a good return on investment. We are institutions of higher education. We want to learn and grow from the changes. And the last point is we want to use the pandemic as a catalyst for change, but not the reason for change. And what I mean by that, and Cameron, I think, mentioned earlier as well, we were already thinking of some of these things in a very slow way. And what we've been able to do is say, how can this pandemic actually be the catalyst by which we can shift gears much more quickly than we otherwise would have? And I never would have thought that McGill, as again a fairly slow-moving institution, could have done what we did in the past year. And many of you on this call would have had a similar experience in your own corners. So that's, I think, something we can capitalize on, because the pull to return back to a more traditional way of doing things is going to be very, very strong, especially for many within the academic community. We can go to the next slide. So what we want to focus on for the rest of today's talk is sort of three thematic areas where we're making concrete changes with respect to this post-COVID institutional change. The first is thinking about new flexible workspaces and work habits. The second is rethinking our teaching and research space. And the third is how we look at our academic program delivery differently as we move through the pandemic. And I'll turn over to Cameron to talk a little bit around how we're looking at the workplaces, work process, and work habit side of things.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. This is somewhat. It's how do you start? It's somewhat of a bonanza. We've got so many things going on. When we talk to staff about coming back, when we talked to them about it earlier, they didn't want to come back. They were afraid of the pandemic. They're at home, they're comfortable. Some are already starting to get tired of this remote working, but they don't want to let it all go. I mean, it's all the stuff we've all heard. I'm not saying anything new, but now that that we are actually thinking of the hybrid model of work and that's on everybody's lips, I don't think there's a unit on this campus that hasn't contacted us and said, can we start now doing some desk sharing and some hoteling and so on? And we had to put the brakes on all this because we do not have the policy framework and we don't have the facilities to actually handle it properly. We would just end up with a bunch of empty offices. And so the university has really, thanks to the start we got working with Elliot and his team on that first set round of reflections, is really starting to think about the future of work on campus. Which will actually roll over into the future of teaching as well. Maybe less on the side of research. It's a little bit more complex. But so the first point that we've written here is defining the future of work at McGill as a priority, building on discoveries. But it does actually capture what we're discovering is a strong desire to modify work routines. I may say this a few times over, but a lot of staff are saying, look, if I can be productive at home, leave me at home. And if I'm going to come into the office, make it worth my while. There's a corollary to that as well, which is even our sustainability office is pointing out that the less commuting our staff do, the closer we're going to get to our carbon zero objective, which is planned for 2040. And so what this leads to the notion that the workplace should have meaning. And I think that's, some people have asked questions about resources for redesigning workspaces. This could be a long, slow process, but to the extent possible, when people come into the office, they should know there's a reason for being there other than just sitting in their office and doing the same work they could have done at home. And therefore, presence must represent more than can be achieved online. But in the three ways of socialization, innovation, and productivity, all at the same time, which leads to the other one, which that means that work processes have to be rethought. If we're going to get a return on investment from changing the workplace, sharing desks and much more socialization space, as you would find in some of the high-tech companies, then we really have to rethink how people do their work and how teams collaborate and how they plan their schedule over a week. And so that you don't end up with people sitting in a closed office looking at a screen exactly like they would if they were sitting in their basement. Why would they come all this way just to do that? And so to help us along the way, we actually have created a new office of new models of work that is mandated for the next 2 years to track what's happening in the realm of work definition and to help McGill actually move into this new era of work. That's coupled with a pilot project where we've chosen 5 units. We've chosen some space that happens to be at WeWork. We have the new office will actually work with these 5 units in redefining their work processes and how they're going to share this space, where there will literally be less than 1 desk per 2 people among the 5 units. So it's quite a jigsaw to get people to use this space in the most efficient way possible. And we'll use what we learned from this pilot project to develop the policy framework and the infrastructure framework for the future. So I'll stop there, Chris, and you can do the other 2 themes, and we'll come back to it.
Thanks, Cameron. And the second theme is the teaching and learning spaces. And one of the things we've started conversations about already with the academic staff, but also our planning offices, is around asking the question, what is the future of a large theater-style lecture halls? These are all over campuses, all around the world, and we have many of them on our campus as well. And one of the commitments we're looking at making is saying, let's actually hit the pause button on any new large classrooms. The future is not having 600 or 700 students sit in one space listening to a lecture that could be easily delivered online. Doesn't mean we don't get rid of all our lecture halls. We're saying let's rethink the future of new projects related to that, and let's actually redesign our current large lecture theaters. And as Elliot mentioned earlier in the presentation, the idea of flat spaces instead of tiered lecture halls and more collaborative learning environments, more active learning classrooms that I also have on this slide, active learning classrooms like the one in the picture, where it's really about collaborative space and about flexibility in using the teaching space. So that, again, we were already moving in this direction, and we have a lot of active learning classrooms already on our campuses. But the idea is to let's actually prioritize that more significantly. Outfitting spaces with new technology. We've had a little bit in the chat already about what it's going to take to not only outfit the technology, but also have the staff to make sure the technology can work seamlessly, because that's also going to be the expectation going forward. And we're working with our information technology group right away to say, how do we actually prioritize what spaces need the right kinds of equipment for next fall, when we do have a much more regular presence of our students and staff on campus. We have a new library project, and one of the priorities in that project space is to build in collaborative learning and research spaces that might capture the non-wet lab kinds of research activities that really require very collaborative approaches to thinking through problems. And our graduate students have particular needs where they feel that they don't have access to good collaborative spaces to learn together. And new building projects are also being designed from a much more interdisciplinary perspective. And in other words, not in a traditional, this is science, this is engineering, but rather, how do we actually build spaces where there's collisions of the different disciplines in a very purposeful way. And the design of the labs in some of the new building projects are using the topology approach, where we don't assign a lab necessarily to a specific discipline, and certainly not to an individual professor, but rather, and Cameron knows I keep going back to this, everything's created as perfect swing space. So over time, we're continually able to move things around without having to find swing space all the time. And this is a very big culture change, because I think, as we all know, professors often will see their lab space or their research space as theirs, not necessarily the university's. And this is a mindset change that I think really has to happen. And this is the opportunity to actually look at some of that. We can go to the next slide. And the other big area, of course, is the academic program delivery. And this has a very dramatic impact on how we think about space use and space design. Just as an example, for the fall term, we've made a decision where all the large enrollment classes will, by default, get a schedule but not a room. In other words, institutionally, we have said, large lectures, we're not going to bring lots of students together. Even if we're allowed to, technically, because of COVID, we've actually made the decision now to say, let's have those be online lectures. Other components of the class can be in person. But then you imagine there's a lot of large classes on campus, and if you think of your own institution of suddenly freeing up all of that space, it can be quite liberating and also quite terrifying depending on your position. But it is actually quite a dramatic shift in thinking about it. Now the question will be, how do we carry that forward beyond next fall, and how do we think about using lecture theaters differently going forward? We're having instructors consider proactively about what worked in terms of online components of their classes, and would they like to continue that. A big part of this is certainly about how the instructor sees their role at the university in the future with respect to teaching. And if they can see some of their role with more online teaching, that's a game changer in terms of liberating space and using space differently. We're looking at prioritizing activities that are higher value, higher impact for in-person. And we're also looking at permanent shifts away from the traditional gymnasium style, thousands of students sweating it out for a final examination. That's a very complicated beast at any university that has those kinds of exams. And if we can rethink that, it again changes the game with respect to how we think about the space use. Opportunities for blended or hybrid teaching, considering different evening or weekend offerings. I think our students are changing a lot, because one piece we've heard from students consistently is they like the flexibility and some of the autonomy that came along with learning online, and they want to hang on to some of that flexibility going forward. So their demands, many of them might, for example, may have traditionally come to campus full-time Monday to Friday. They might actually take part-time jobs or have a different approach to their higher education journey overall, and would want much more flexibility. Well, we're not built as an institution right now that offers a lot of evening classes or uses weekends very effectively, or the summer term as well very effectively. So these are some of the changes to academic program delivery. And I think, again, I know many of us on the call are thinking about, space, resources, new builds, design, etc. But if we can change the academic culture with respect to academic program delivery, it will have an incredible impact on how we think about space use. And I think the last point is there's also interest in other short programs, stackable certificates, micro-credentials, et cetera. And I think we all are aware of those opportunities, and they'll also change with respect to the post-COVID world. So in terms of what is the ROI, what is our goal here is, of course, to make sure we're doing things more efficiently that are going to help out in the long term. And I think, as Cameron mentioned, the staff are looking for more flexibility. And as I just mentioned, so are the students. And this is going to be the norm, and this is going to be an expectation going forward. If we don't position our institutions in a way to adapt to those needs of flexibility, everyone's going to be in trouble. We have to build some flexibility in our systems, in our policies, so that we're able to adapt to those needs. Our staff as they come through, and I think of this when I've got kids in high school now, when they come through and learn what it means to be a flexible learner, when they go through the education system at the university, they're still going to have that approach. And when they enter the workforce, they're still going to want that more and more and more. And so even among all levels of the institution, we have to start thinking about that need of flexibility. I think building flexibility also in the use of our classroom spaces allows for very important redistribution of how we think about our space. And for example, many of your institutions might have to rent off-campus space for certain reasons. We certainly do, and it's quite common depending on your institution. That costs a lot of money. And if we can redistribute the space on campus, that's going to free up rental costs, for example. Different models of work will increase efficiency, and Cameron talked about that quite a bit. And the campus also takes on a new meaning as a place to learn, co-create, and innovate, where we focus more on those collision spaces, on the sticky spaces that Elliot mentioned at the start. We focus on how to bring people together, whether it's for their academic journey, whether it's as a staff member, or whether it's whether it's as an instructor. Those spaces become really quite critical. I'll just see if Cameron wants to add to that before we go to constraints.
Yeah, I do actually. Just a couple of small points. I really want to pick up on what you just said about the students and their expectations and staff and their expectations. How can one put this? Many of the public that will be coming onto our campus, students and staff, are now sitting in a classroom with a mask on. And we do not know today what they will expect of us when they get here, whether that's as workers in several years or as university students in a year or two. Some of these people are in grade 8 now, some of them are in grade 10, and they're going to be coming to us. And as exactly as Chris said, with the ideas about new ways of doing things and new models of work. And the university has to be attractive to these people. And so we will be in competition for these as workers and students when they show up at our doorstep. And I think that really does affect how we use our outdoor spaces very, very much. And can we actually offer alternatives to work models and learning models that will be interesting to that public that are actually in their formative years now? I think most of us, because of just default behavior, are thinking of the future people on our campuses as if they were us or as if they were our grown children, but actually they're not. They're actually sitting in a classroom with a mask on, learning different ways of doing things and having done maybe even part of their grade school online. So I'll pass it back to you, Chris, but I just wanted to reinforce that point.
Great, thanks. And then we're going to go to another poll here in a second, but I just wanted to mention in the previous slide to this one, Elliot, we've got what we see as some of the constraints, and I wanted to point out academic culture as being a critical constraint, because it really is a driver in a lot of the ways, in a lot of the flexibility we have to make changes. Work culture, short-term funding, managing expectations becomes really important as well. Everyone wants to jump on change right away without necessarily thinking through all of the implications of that and without having the right framework for the change. And of course, external factors. So I'll hand it over to you, Elliot, in terms of the next poll.
That was great. So right now, we want to give everyone a moment to reflect on all the great ideas they've heard and think about what's the top strategy you could adopt at your institution. So this is the second poll, and we're wondering what you're thinking about. Is it more flexible workspaces and work habits? Is it investing in online teaching, both the technology, the training and teaching support that Chris mentioned? Is it redesigning or rebuilding more active learning classrooms? Is it redesigning or rebuilding more collaborative research spaces? Is it expanding the informal learning project spaces? Is it investing in change management? Is it reducing your lease spaces? So we're interested to hear what you're thinking. We've got about 10 minutes left in the session. So after this, we'll roll, once we hear from you, we'll roll into our lessons learned and then have the final 10 minutes for Q&A. So let's see what the results are. Overwhelmingly, folks are looking at new flexible workspaces, and then perhaps not surprisingly, investing in the change management that you'll need to pull that off, as well as new kinds of teaching. I feel like every institution's Office of Change Management first probably has to call itself something different, and then has to staff up considerably to support all these changes, because I'm not sure people like to be managed, like their change to be managed, but they actually do need change management. So interesting pickle. We're all gonna find ourselves in there, and so flexible workspace, change management, investing in technology, and active learning classrooms seem to be coming really to the fore. So we didn't get to this, to hear about how you're adopting the strategies in the future, but we might be able to cover that as we reflect in our last 10 minutes here on the future and take your questions. So let's cover our last lessons learned here, and then open it up for a final Q&A period where, of course, we'd love to hear about how you might adopt these strategies at your institution and questions you have on moving forward. So take it away, Cameron.
Thank you. Thanks, Elliot. So simply, and this is very schematic, obviously, but these lessons, this is all because it's a work in progress. We know that. So one of the huge challenges, but we keep at it, is bringing different departments and functions together to prioritize. And many of these departments are not used to working together. McGill, as in any other traditional university, is an institution mostly of silos. But what we're finding is that there's pretty open-mindedness about working together. But this is early days, and we might see some relapse into former behaviors. So we got to keep our eye on the change management side of this and make sure that people participate. Take it slow. This is partially because you can only go so fast. There's this expression, don't get so far ahead of your troops that they confuse you for the enemy. And that's really what some of the leadership in this is about, is stay with people, but also because we don't know the ideal outcomes. a lot of this is going to be actually emergent for several years to come. And I think we have to consider it as emergent and really catch the lessons learned as we go. And priorities, everything is about staying interconnected and paying attention to sequencing and how not to be too disruptive, but to be sufficiently disruptive as you go forward. And then finally, the leadership of the institution is going to be critical to whatever happens. And we're right at McGill. We're blessed. This impulse to change and the invitation to change is coming right from the top. There's full acceptance that that there's no expectation here to become post-pandemic exactly what we were pre-pandemic, but that there are major challenges with existing space. But at least we have a couple of major projects under construction that are now called to change their plans and reflect what we've learned in the pandemic. So I'll stop there, unless Chris, you'd like to add something, or Elliot, but we can go to the Q&A. Go ahead.
I just had one quick point. Finding the champions, and I think as the slide says, it has to be many different kinds of leaders from many different corners of the university or the college, where in terms of finding champions becomes essential. It's within the academic community, it's within facilities, it's within the senior leadership. And I think people can be really inspired and excited by some of the things we talked about today. And I think there's an opportunity to use those people for good in terms of some of this work. And I think if you can pull together the people that are inspired by this, as opposed to, I'm having to drag their heels through it, actually build off their energy and enthusiasm for it, I think there's a really nice opportunity. And take it slow sounds paradoxical in terms of we have limited time to make these changes, but I think if things are sequenced properly and carefully, then we can take it slow in the right way and then develop the right changes to policy, changes to funding, changes to design. They all have to come in sequence. But I think it's really finding the champions is perhaps one of the key parts early on, and then sequencing, looking at the interconnections, and then within each of those, methodically, carefully, and properly with change management and communications as a priority, start to look at those changes. We're going to be very actively involved in it at McGill. As soon as this academic term is over, we're going to be developing a work group with champions from around the university to actually start to look at the prioritizing and sequencing so these changes can stick longer term. I'll see if Elliot has any last thoughts.
I think you all covered it. I'm interested to hear if there are questions and from our participants as they think about, for instance, it seems like lots of folks are thinking about flexible workspace, online teaching, and managing all that change. We'd love to hear if you have questions about how to do that or suggestions for other institutions in our last few minutes here. And if not, we can give everybody a few minutes back to do something extravagant like go to the bathroom or get a cup of coffee.
Here's a warning. If you get these extra minutes to go to the bathroom, don't start answering emails because you'll never get to the bathroom.
And I will say you can all certainly reach out. I think the last slide has our email addresses on it, and certainly don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions. And I do see
there is a question, yes. Technologies. I don't know that we're there yet, Chris, where there's a lot of literature on this, and I think there are industry leaders that are not in the academic sector that are doing this. And I would actually refer to some of those, like Deloitte is one, I guess, and Jones Lang LaSalle, who have a significant academic practice as well. But Elliot, you might have some more inside information on the answer to that question.
Yeah, I think there's a number of different ways to go, and it depends on whether you're talking about piloting something or rolling it out at the enterprise scale. But interestingly enough, a lot of these co-working companies have basically developed great user-friendly tools in order to operate their own space. Like Census is one that usually there's a pretty familiar toolkit. It's about checking in people. It's about booking a desk or booking a conference room. So there's no shortage of platforms used to operate spaces more flexibly. And I think for hybrid teaching and meetings, it's not much different than Zoom or Teams or even good old WebEx or GoToMeeting that people have been using for these meetings. I think the big change is mics and cameras, because I think where the hybrid meeting often falls apart is when the people who aren't in the room can't hear the conversation that's in a room. I took part in 3 hybrid project interviews earlier this week, and at one point I had to sort of like bring in the big guns, just to pick up a faint whisper in terms of my headphones of what was going on in the room. So I think that paying attention to cameras and mics are kind of as important as displays.
Indeed.
Well, I want to, if I don't see any new questions, I think that's it. I think we can give folks about a minute or 2 back. Thank you, Cameron, Christopher, and Elliot for your insights today. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. This is the last session time slot for the EACUBO workshop. Thank you for joining us. If you do need CPEs, make sure that you do complete the last polling checkpoint that we currently have open. And we will be following up with everyone with the overall evaluation of the workshop after the workshop ends. We look forward to your feedback. It's very helpful as we continue to develop programming and look forward to programming for the annual meeting in the fall, as well as our workshop, our 2022 workshop. Again, thank you for joining us today. Have a good the rest of your day, and thank you for joining us for the workshop. Thanks to our speakers as well.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks so much.
Thank you,
Thanks
everyone.
for all this great support.
Take care.
Bye-bye.